there, good evening, and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, you'll find us at JimBohannonShow.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks. Margie Zarloletta reports that production has been halted on the film Rust after actor Alec Baldwin accidentally shot and killed a cinematographer in New Mexico last week.
The production team for Rust calls it a pause rather than an end. The team tells crew members in an email that work on the film has been suspended until the end of the investigation into the death of cinematographer Galena Hutchins. The team says it's working with law enforcement and conducting its own safety review. Court documents say Alec Baldwin was using the gun in a rehearsal for a scene that called him to point it at the camera. Authorities say Baldwin was told the gun was safe to use. I'm Margie Zarloletta.
We're joined by Robert Crain, a nationally renowned personal injury attorney of the firm Crain Brogdon Rogers, based in Dallas, to take a look at the Baldwin situation. In particular, do you see a basis here for any criminal charges that might be placed against Alec Baldwin, given the fact that he was not only an actor on this film, but also a producer?
Well, good evening, Jim. And it's a good question. Based on what we know at this point in time, it looks like he will probably not face criminal charges. He was following protocols as an actor. He was handed the gun and told that it was a cold gun. He was rehearsing his scene, so he was doing as he was supposed to be doing. All that being said, protocol-wise, you're handed a gun. I think most of us who grew up being taught gun safety know the first thing we do is we look and make sure it's an unloaded gun. Now, this gun was supposed to have blanks in it. So he followed protocols on set. My guess is that the police investigation is going to look much more closely at the first assistant director, Dave Halls, who was responsible for that gun safety, than they will with Alec Baldwin, because I don't think they're going to have enough intent or recklessness on the part of Baldwin to charge him.
There do seem to be a lot of questions about what happened on sets previously. For example, filming of something called Freedom's Path, crew members charging that there were safety conditions that greatly disturbed them. So apparently this was not an isolated incident in terms of questions about the proper procedure for handling firearms. And again, as you say, I mean, I had NRA training as a kid and learned a lot of things. A gun is always to be considered loaded. Never point a gun at anyone or anything you don't intend to actually shoot. Assume that a gun is always loaded. And these are basic rules that I grew up with. I guess some people don't.
Well, I mean, you've hit it on the head. There are a lot of disturbing things in the history of this production. Apparently, firearms went off on multiple occasions prior to this event, unintended. The first assistant director we mentioned, as you noted, had been on a set in 2019. He was fired from that set in 2019 because a gun went off and it was not supposed to. And that same first assistant director was on a set back in 2000 called The Crow Salvation, which was a sequel. That was a sequel to a movie called The Crow that was made in 1993. And that movie, The Crow in 1993, is when Bruce Lee's son, Brandon Lee, was shot in the same manner on a set and killed. So there is plenty of history of problems with guns on sets that this particular first assistant director should have been aware of, was personally part of, and his armorer, and every set is required to have an armorer on set when guns are involved. In this case, was a very inexperienced 24-year-old working on one of our first sets. There are just a lot of questions about the gun safety and protocols. But as you mentioned, there's just some basic safety with guns that just weren't followed here, and that is very disturbing. And we've already seen some changes on some other Hollywood productions over the weekend, and hopefully this will be a long, hard look throughout the industry.
Now, one thing I'm not familiar with would be blank rounds. I'm familiar with actual cartridges that contain lead bullets, and have fired many a one in my life, but I've never fired a blank. I've been told that blank rounds fire, I think, a cotton wadding of some sort, which actually, if it hits you, could perhaps maybe put out an eye or something, but it wouldn't do more than maybe bruise most skin surfaces on your body. I've never dealt with that, but I'm wondering, can you look and tell at a gun whether or not it has blanks or real bullets in it?
Well, number one, I want to remind your audience that we all owe you personally a great debt of gratitude and thanks for your service in our military in your lifetime. And you served honorably, and thank you for your service. You are much more adept and experienced with guns. And I'm like you. I've got a vacuum of education on blanks. I've never been around blanks and don't know. I have listened to one interview recently talking about the difference in appearance. But something that should also, be reiterated here is that even blanks, and you're dealing with gunpowder. We've got an instance in Hollywood history where an actor, with blanks, fired a gun at his head, just trying to be funny, and killed himself because of the impact of the gunpowder. So whether it's blanks or not, and in this particular case, you've got a scene where the actor is to be shooting the gun at the camera with a camera person, cinematographer in this case, sitting right behind it. And whether it's blanks or not, I would think that, as you mentioned before, we've got to get back to basics. You don't fire a gun without taking a second, third look and making sure when you're going to point it knowingly at a person that it's got exactly what you need in it.
Now, as I understand it, New Mexico state law includes a charge of involuntary manslaughter. Since someone, in fact, did die, may we assume that prosecutors in New Mexico may be looking at someone, whoever that may be, to charge with involuntary manslaughter?
Absolutely. And when you get into manslaughter, the mens rea or the intent of the actor is not an intentional mens rea. You can get into a recklessness, that they're just so reckless in their conduct when they should not have been, that such a charge can be brought. And it's not unprecedented. There is an instance in a movie called Midnight Rider where there was a death of a camera operator in 2014, and involuntary manslaughter charges were brought, and the defendant pled guilty to it, who was an assistant director on that film. And ultimately a plea was entered of a 10-year probation. So it's not unprecedented. And my suspicions is that law enforcement is going to take a real hard look at that potential charge.
Attorney Robert Crain, nationally recognized personal injury attorney with the firm Crain Brogdon Rogers of Dallas.